Hi, I'm Brandon with The Periphery, and today I'm going to talk about the Kavanaugh case. Not the case so much itself, but what it exemplifies. What the overarching truth is that is revealed by this specific case. I'm going to reveal an overarching truth about United States society. Neither side knows what happened 36 years ago. Only Kavanaugh and his accuser do. And that's to the best that memory can allow. But suddenly, everyone who chimes in, at least that I've seen chime in, which is a continuously growing number of people, seem to have an expert opinion on witness testimony. They talk about the accuser's polygraph, or they talk about Kavanaugh's passion, whether that's good or bad, and evidence for or against him. The fuel with which people chime in, the desperation that they're right, that their side wins, shows that this is an ideological battle. This isn't about due process or women's rights or justice for the accused or the accuser. All those things are in play in this specific case, and so it's easy to look at those. But I think underlying all of it are two sides desperate to win. And because they're wrapped so tightly around their desired outcome, the side that they're desperate to have happen, him be voted in or him not being voted in, they're wrapped so tightly around that outcome that not a ray of light can shine truth into the situation anymore. And this phenomenon that happens, where people are so desperate for their side to win, indicates the problem that is the institution of Washington, D.C. There's a fundamental issue with that as the single power structure of the United States as a country. And I'll get to that in a little bit. So, in all, those speaking out on either side seem incapable of seeing this matter from the other's perspective, that this may be a brave woman coming forward, and that this may be a man falsely accused. This is because justice isn't the driving force of these two sides. The priority is winning at whatever cost may incur, at whatever depraved actions one must ignore. So even if the Democrats are underhanded, the people siding with them are going to sweep that under the rug, and even if Kavanaugh and Trump have their character defects, the people on their side are going to sweep those under the rug. So we ignore that and we attack the other side, and despite any damage that might be caused along the way, it's collateral damage. We must win. But this lack of empathy and reason, these promotions of harm and destruction, are what make one thing within this Kavanaugh situation clear. And that's that this one monolith, this institution of the US government, is becoming more and more incapable of organizing our society. America is a land with higher than normal number of reactionaries, hotheads, doomsdayers. I remember my uncle saying to me when I was a boy that Bill Clinton's re-election was going to be the end of America. Later, I heard people say that about George Bush, then I'd hear it about Obama, and now I hear it about Trump. I've been to several countries around the world, and I've stayed in a couple for extended periods of time. And when you do, you experience places that redefine the word mellow. We're a high-strung culture in America, and it's rush, 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 and it's protest, a lot of rabble-rousing, a lot of fear, a lot of guns, a lot of people who think that bad things are going to happen. At the same time, we're innovators. We're always on the cutting edge of technology, or often at the cutting edge of technology to accelerate our lives. So if you put together such innovation and attention to drama, we end up with a society run by an institution, the federal government, that struggles with the unwieldy nature of a reactive and, by the way, very diverse public with ever-advancing technology at their disposal. The Kavanaugh saga is just one example. So if we look back just in the recent past, after years of feeling ignored, decades perhaps, tens of millions of Americans, again enabled by technology, they were able to organize and move Trump and Bernie Sanders toward the top of their party's nominations, Now, the Trump side ended up winning the nomination and then the election. But in response to this, and in response to such anti-Obama activity, similar kind of anti-Obama efforts, now we have the liberal or Democratic side working feverishly against Trump and his supporters who helped him win the election. On top of this tit-for-tat back and forth going on in DC, we have this detail which isn't minor but is probably a controversial truth, that there's the issue of a decreasing intellectual and ethical merit, I think, of those who seek office today. If you compare them to the kind of men and women in the recent past, and men going back to the founding, you see that there used to be scholars and true statesmen and intellectuals, philosophers who would become politicians, and now you just don't see that the best and the brightest of our population. I think they're susceptible to the drama and the revenge and the tit for tat and just those battles that we see in Washington today. Well, because both sides have their hands quite dirty at this point in 2018, many say that Republicans, the politicians and the supporters, damage their side by choosing Trump. And now today, many from the conservative side are saying the Democrats, the politicians and the supporters, are damaging their side by what they're doing. Well, both are right. And in so doing, everyone involved is debasing the institution they hope to lead. This exemplifies and expedites the untenability of this institution. I mean, so while they're clawing to get to the top and king of the hill, they're eroding the hill upon which they want to stand. Meanwhile, we have technology and a diverse population that is just going 1,000 miles an hour, and a government that by its nature can only crawl or walk. This kind of untenable nature, this movement toward an untenability of the Washington DC establishment was inevitable. In a society as reactive, as innovative as ours, the federal government now, lately, has been exposed to just an ever-growing amount of fear radiating from a public in the US afraid and angry about influential policy and people, and with, again, social media and just all the ways in which we can connect and organize today and make noise. What would have been a dull roar about a Supreme Court justice that was controversial is now a deafening scream. And thus the Supreme Court nomination, it can't proceed peacefully. And spilling over into the civilian world, there have been at least 4 cases in the past year of politicians and political pundits attacked while eating at restaurants. And unless something changes drastically and fairly soon, I don't see why that would decrease. I suppose particularly if politics continues to go in the direction that it does, which may or may not happen with, I think, Republican control, because it tends to be the liberal side that does get away with more outlandish public activity. For better or for worse, it's just the reality of how our society is set up for whatever reason. Maybe the Democrats will take over and there'll be less protesting and that kind of public outcry. But what won't slow down is technological advancement, making it easier for people to organize again and be heard. And to be heard, or to have a country's attention at this one power structure, and a country like ours, which is huge and full of reactive people from diverse backgrounds, so there's a lot of different things being addressed, a lot of different needs that have a difficult time being met. This one focal point, the federal government, is now like a fuse. It's now like a fuse surging with too much electricity, with all those chiming in this specific case, about the Kavanaugh confirmation. They're indignant about the misbehavior from the other side, of which there's plenty of evidence on both sides, so people can scream a lot and they feel justified in it. Meanwhile, they're clinging to their beliefs that she is 100% right or he is 100% right. There's no middle ground. And they're doing so fearful the other ideology might beat theirs. This activity is blowing the fuse that is Washington, D.C. And again, this is just the latest example. Some of those protests, like out in Charlottesville, perhaps there was another fuse blown, the Black Lives Matter, maybe the Tea Party. I mean, there's been a lot of examples of electricity surging in this country. And we don't have a grid, we don't have a political grid that's robust enough to handle this activity. So what I'm saying here is that we need to come up with something else. And I don't recommend any kind of drastic, despite what it might sound like I'm going toward. I'm not in any way interested in any kind of changing of the government, nothing like that. I think the government will weaken simply because it can't handle the load, and it'll just happen as a consequence. There's no need to try to change it, really. It'll just be incompatible more and more, and people will look elsewhere for the answers they're seeking. And I think that's the good news, that in lieu of this giant dinosaur that I call the federal government, that agile institutions and technologies are and will continue to fill the void. So we're talking about community organizations, businesses large and small, nonprofits, and individuals will increase their influence in how we shape our societies in the ways we desire to determine justice and freedoms. So I say that while this Kavanaugh hearing has become a loaded saga representing sexual abuse, justice, corruption, power, the way I see it, this is about whether or not a person is chosen to sit on a court with waning influence over our lives. And I say thank goodness, because the concentration of fear directed toward Washington, D.C. has increasingly made it an incubator of rage, desperation, deceit, and despair. I think if you can let go of your side of this issue and take a step back, you can recognize the cesspool of people and actions D.C. has become. And you can also see a future of our society that doesn't lie with what happens there. It doesn't matter how the deck chairs are arranged on the Titanic, to use a common analogy. The priority is moving people off the slowly sinking ship. Despite what our ideologism is leading people to believe, neither side is evil. I know, it becomes a surprise. If you're a die-hard Republican or Democrat, you darn well believe the other side is evil. And that you come to that conclusion, I think, is evidence of something unhealthy in our structure, in our institutional structure, and in individuals' thinking. In the social dynamic that we've established right now in the US. If you think the other side is evil, then I think there's something going wrong. We need to recognize, I think, that neither side is evil, because we need to build common ground and cool heads with which we can calmly get along in a world where government is going to mean less and less, and person-to-person contact is going to mean more and more.